Imagine walking into a mansion that gleams like a magazine cover, polished marble floors, sunlight bending through cathedral windows, a dining table set with crystal glasses that look like they've never been touched, and in the middle of all this grandeur, a small 7-year-old girl clutching the hand of a woman in a plain cotton uniform, eyes full of trust. You'd think this was her mother, but it wasn't, not yet. This little girl, Sophie Lancaster, had lost her real mother just a year before in a tragic accident, and her father, Jonathan Lancaster, a wealthy, calculating man who ran one of the most influential private investment firms in the Southeast, was now convinced that the best way to help his daughter heal was to give her a choice, to pick her own new mom from a group of women he hand-selected. It was a plan his therapist had pitched to give Sophie agency in a life where so much had been ripped from her, and Jonathan liked the sound of that. He imagined refined elegance, well-bred manners, and the ability to manage both the social demands of his world and the emotional needs of his child. So he invited 5 women from elite backgrounds, a top-tier lawyer, a celebrated doctor, a luxury real estate developer, an heiress to a chain of fashion houses, and an award-winning architect. Each had a resume that could make any society page editor swoon. Each was white, affluent, impeccably dressed, and on paper flawless. And then there was Elise Carter. Elise was the last person anyone would have guessed would become the center of this story. 28 years old, with a degree in education she'd put on hold to care for her ill mother, Elise had taken the job as a housekeeper in the Lancaster estate just 3 months earlier. She was not part of Jonathan's selection pool. She wasn't dressed in designer labels. Her hair wasn't styled by a celebrity salon. But Sophie had found in Elise something none of the other women could fake: warmth that didn't feel like a performance. And that, more than anything, was why the other women despised her. In an environment where appearances were currency, Elise's authenticity was dangerous. It upset the order. It made Sophie gravitate toward her in a way that undermined their careful strategies. I've seen this dynamic play out before in corporate boardrooms, in exclusive schools, even in small-town social circles. People who've built their identities on status often feel threatened not by direct competition, but by the person who doesn't even seem to be playing the same game. Elise wasn't auditioning to be Sophie's mother. She was simply showing up day after day to make breakfast, help with homework, and listen when Sophie had nightmares. And that, ironically, was winning Sophie's heart faster than any carefully curated charm could. From day one, the quiet hostility started. Whispered comments about knowing your place floated in the air like secondhand smoke. One of the candidates, Veronica Steele, the oil heiress and self-proclaimed leader of the group, would smirk whenever Elise entered a room, her eyes scanning Elise's uniform as though it were a personal insult to the marble floors. Others followed suit with subtle digs remarks about appropriate role models or maintaining standards for the child. Jonathan, in his office, started noticing something unsettling. Sophie's smiles were fewer. She'd begun waking from bad dreams again. There was a tension in her small shoulders that hadn't been there since Elise arrived. This was the kind of change that doesn't happen because of one big fight. It's the accumulation of tiny, cutting interactions, the kind that slip under the radar unless you're paying close attention. And Jonathan was paying attention. What the candidates didn't know was that he had quietly installed cameras and microphones in most of the common, Areas not because he suspected Elise, but because his gut told him something wasn't right. Those recordings revealed a pattern. The candidates didn't just dislike Elise. They were organizing against her. They'd interrupt Sophie mid-sentence if she mentioned Elise. They'd compete for Sophie's attention with gifts and activities, only to express thinly veiled disgust if Sophie drifted back to Elise's side. And through all of it, Elise responded. With calm, measured grace. She didn't snap back, didn't retreat into resentment. She played the long game, a game she might not have consciously set out to win, but one she understood on a deeper level. See, Elise had grown up the daughter of a domestic worker. She knew exactly how these women thought. She'd heard this brand of polite cruelty before, always coded in social niceties, always excused as tradition or propriety, and she knew something they didn't. Arrogance is predictable. People who think you're beneath them will eventually hand you the very rope you need to hang their credibility, if you can endure long enough to take it. This wasn't just a clash of personalities. It was a collision between two worldviews. On one side, the belief that worth is tied to wealth, pedigree, and presentation. On the other, the conviction that love, trust, and competence can't be bought or staged. What makes this setup so captivating and dangerous is that the battleground wasn't just Jonathan's choice of a wife. It was Sophie's future understanding of human value. Whether she grew up believing kindness was weakness or that dignity could coexist with strength was being shaped in real time, under the watch of security cameras and the blind spots of privilege. And while the 5 candidates plotted over champagne in the mansion's private library, Elise was in the kitchen teaching Sophie how to make butterfly-shaped cookies, offering her not just a snack, but a memory of comfort in a house where most comfort was conditional. That difference, conditional versus unconditional care, was about to become the deciding factor in a war no one had officially declared, but everyone was already fighting. By the end of the second week, the unspoken hostility toward Elise had crystallized into something organized, a silent, calculated alliance between 5 women who otherwise would have been clawing at each other for Jonathan's approval. You could almost admire the efficiency if it weren't so deeply ugly. Veronica Steele, with her oil money poise and surgically perfected smile, naturally took the role of strategist. Her allies, Patricia Vaughn, the corporate lawyer with a mind like a guillotine; Clarissa Halley, a dermatologist whose clients included half the city's old money families; Renee Caldwell, an architect with political connections; and Alexandra Pierce, heiress to a global hotel empire, followed her lead. They met in the mansion's private library, believing themselves beyond the reach of prying ears. Of course, they didn't know Jonathan's microphones were tucked into the molding above their heads. Their conversations weren't idle gossip, they were tactical meetings. "We have to frame this delicately," Veronica whispered one afternoon, diamond earrings catching the light as she glanced through the glass doors toward the garden. Outside, Elise was showing Sophie how to draw hopscotch squares with chalk. "That woman is influencing the child in ways that don't suit our environment." Patricia flipped open a leather-bound planner. "Legally, Jonathan can terminate any employee for cultural incompatibility. No mess, no labor board headaches." Clarissa smirked, a polite euphemism for what we're all thinking. Renee rolled her eyes. "She's making Sophie think. Friendship can cross social lines." "That's not how the world works." Alexandra was more blunt. Let's stop pretending this is about chess lessons or cultural exposure. A black housekeeper is taking up emotional space that belongs to us. She's winning her heart, and if we lose that, we lose everything." They didn't know Elise could have recited those lines in her sleep. She'd grown up hearing the same refrains when her mother worked in Charleston's historic homes. She understood the coded language, not the right fit, inappropriate influence, standards. It was all the same old melody, played over and over by people terrified of losing control. This is where Elise's patience became lethal. She didn't confront them directly. She let them underestimate her. She knew from experience that the more certain they were of their superiority, the sloppier they would become. What none of them noticed, what they couldn't notice, was how Sophie's attachment to Elise wasn't just about affection. It was about trust. Sophie had been through a trauma, and children in that state don't latch onto someone lightly. They test, they observe, they decide whether the adult in front of them will stay. Elise passed those tests without even trying, because she wasn't playing to pass them. She was just showing up with consistency and care. But the candidates saw that bond as a threat to be dismantled. That afternoon, they made their first coordinated move. As Sophie headed toward the kitchen to find Elise, Veronica intercepted her. "Darling, how about we play something more sophisticated today? I brought a chess set all the way from Paris just for you." "I don't know how to play chess," Sophie replied, trying to sidestep. "Exactly why you should learn," Patricia added smoothly, blocking her path with a perfectly timed smile. "Games like this are important for developing privileged minds." Sophie frowned. "Elise taught me checkers yesterday. She said all games help you think better." The tension in the hallway thickened instantly. Clarissa leaned down, her tone sugar-coated but cold. "Some games are more appropriate for certain people, sweetie." And right then, Elise appeared in the doorway, holding a tray of warm chocolate chip cookies. She had heard every word. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, voice calm and sweet as honey. "Sophie, your cookies are ready, yes, the butterfly-shaped ones I promised." Sophie's face lit up as she darted past the wall of silk blouses and diamond bracelets. Veronica tried to salvage the moment. "Elise, don't you think you're taking on a bit too much with Sophie? We're here to guide her development." Elise didn't blink. "Of course, Miss Steele. I'm just following Mr. Lancaster's instructions to keep her happy and fed." Alexandra added, "Feeding is different from forming emotional bonds. It's best to keep a professional distance." Elise smiled again, but her eyes just for a second showed steel. "I understand. I've always been taught that caring for children means giving them exactly what they need when they need it." The reply was polite enough to pass for compliance, but it landed with a sting the women couldn't quite shake. Later that night, Jonathan watched the library footage and saw something remarkable. The candidates thought they were documenting Elise's missteps in a shared file, incidents they twisted into accusations of overstepping. But what they were really recording was Elise's professionalism in the face of deliberate provocation. More tellingly, Jonathan saw patterns, small sabotages designed to erode Sophie's trust in Elise, calculated remarks meant to plant seeds of doubt. And Sophie, for all her innocence, was starting to notice too. At dinner the next evening, she asked the question that froze every fork midair. "Daddy, why don't the ladies like Elise?" Veronica's laugh was thin. "We like everyone here, darling." Sophie shook her head. That's not true. I heard you say she didn't know her place and that you wanted to make her go away." The silence was so deep you could hear the clock ticking on the far wall. Patricia tried to recover. "Sweetheart, you must have misunderstood. Grown-up conversations can sound different, but Jonathan, watching their faces, knew his daughter had understood perfectly. And so had he. This wasn't just social tension, it was a siege. And the longer it went on, the more dangerous it became for both Sophie's recovery and Elise's livelihood. Elise, meanwhile, was already making calls, quiet, strategic ones, to people who could help her fight a battle she hadn't chosen but wasn't about to lose. The call Elise made that night wasn't to a lawyer, at least, not yet. It was to her older sister, Mariah Carter, a Washington, D.C.-based investigative journalist who had a gift for connecting dots people didn't even know existed. Elise kept her voice low in the annex room, a space barely bigger than a college dorm, while the glow from the main house spilled faintly through the curtains. "Mariah, I need you to dig. These women aren't just being cruel, they're trying to erase me from Sophie's life. And they're organized." Mariah didn't need much convincing. Years of covering systemic inequality had trained her to recognize the patterns in Elise's description. "All right," she said. "Give me names, give me what you've heard. And give me 48 hours. Elise exhaled, relief and resolve mixing in her chest. "They think I'm just a cleaner. They have no idea who they're dealing with." While Mariah began pulling threads in D.C., Jonathan was conducting his own investigation closer to home. He contacted Marcus Lee, a private investigator who specialized in background checks on the wealthy and well-connected. Marcus moved quickly, discreetly, and what he uncovered was the kind of material that didn't just tarnish reputations, it detonated them. Veronica Steele, quietly expelled from 2 charitable boards for accounting irregularities that suspiciously coincided with luxury purchases. Patricia Vaughn, multiple employee harassment lawsuits, 3 involving racial discrimination. Clarissa Halle lost her medical license in 2 states before settling in Georgia, each time under the shadow of malpractice claims. Renee Caldwell, investigated by the IRS for tax evasion, case closed only after a suspicious settlement. Alexandra Pierce, facing 3 separate lawsuits from former hotel staff alleging a hostile work environment tied to race and gender. Each file was thick with documentation, court records, sworn affidavits, financial trails. Meanwhile, inside the Lancaster mansion, the women were escalating. Small inconveniences became personal attacks. Elise's kitchen supplies mysteriously went missing. Sophie's favorite sketchbook vanished, only to reappear stained. And then came the low blow. Sophie's most precious possession, a worn teddy bear given by her late mother, disappeared one morning. Hours later, Alexandra found it in Elise's closet. "Sophie," Alexandra announced with faux sympathy, holding the bear aloft. "Look what was in the employee's room." Sophie's eyes widened, confusion warring with hurt. "Elise, why did you take it?" Elise crouched down, her voice calm but steady. "Sweetheart, I didn't. Someone must have put him there by mistake." Patricia feigned disbelief. "A mistake? Sophie, did you leave your bear in here?" "No," Sophie whispered, tears threatening. "I always keep him on my bed." That was Clarissa's cue, kneeling to Sophie's level, her tone dripping with mock compassion. Sometimes People take things that aren't theirs not to be mean, but because they want them. Jonathan, watching from his office feed, felt his stomach turn. Elise didn't argue, didn't try to defend herself with desperation. She simply wrapped her arms around Sophie and said softly, "You know in your heart I would never take something of yours. And people who love you will never try to make you doubt that." It was such a simple response, but it carried the weight of an entire philosophy, the refusal to let lies reshape the truth between them. That night, Mariah called back, her voice electric. "Elise, it's worse than you thought. I've got documented scandals on every single one of them, public records, official reports, you name it. And I can have it packaged and ready for broadcast by Monday. If they want a war, we're going public." At the same time, Jonathan was on the phone with Marcus. "I've got enough to sink all 5, Marcus said. "The only question is, how far do you want to take it?" Jonathan glanced toward the garden where Elise and Sophie were laughing over a late-night marshmallow roast all the way. What neither Marcus nor Mariah knew was that Elise had also been working a third angle. She'd reached out to Dr. Angela Harper, her former university advisor and one of the nation's top experts on child development and trauma recovery. Dr. Harper agreed to conduct an independent, discreet evaluation of Sophie, documenting the measurable improvement in her emotional state since Elise entered her life. If the attacks ever reached court, they'd be met not just with counter-accusations, but with ironclad psychological evidence. This wasn't just defense anymore, it was preparation for a decisive counterstrike. Elise was no longer simply enduring the siege. She was laying the groundwork to end it. By Friday morning, the Lancaster mansion felt like it was holding its breath. The 5 candidates still carried themselves with that familiar socialite assurance, but underneath there was a faint jitteriness they couldn't quite disguise. Elise noticed it in the way Veronica kept glancing toward her phone, or how Patricia's voice had taken on an edge of forced brightness. They didn't know exactly what was coming, but they sensed a shift in the air, and they were right. Jonathan had quietly set the stage for what he called, in his own mind, the reckoning. Invitations had been sent out for a final decision meeting. The 5 women assumed this was the day Jonathan would name his choice. They arrived in couture dresses and with expressions carefully curated for victory photos. What they didn't know was that Jonathan had also invited 3 other guests, Mariah Carter, carrying a polished binder of her findings, Marcus Lee with a digital presentation loaded and ready, and Dr. Angela Harper, whose evaluation report on Sophie was printed in triplicate. Elise stood quietly near the back of the room, wearing a simple navy dress, not a uniform, not a costume. For someone else's approval. Sophie sat beside her, swinging her legs, unaware of just how much was about to change. Jonathan began without flourish. "Ladies, before I announce anything, I want to share a few discoveries I've made over the last month." Veronica leaned back, smiling with calculated patience. "Of course, Jonathan. We're all eager to hear your thoughts." The screen lit up behind him with the headline, "Oil Heiress Diverts Charity Funds to Personal Accounts." Beneath it, a photograph of Veronica, champagne flute in hand, lifted straight from a gala. Veronica's smile faltered. "That's defamatory." "It's public record," Mariah interrupted smoothly, stepping forward, "and confirmed by multiple sources. I'm Mariah Carter, investigative journalist. I verify every line. Jonathan clicked again. Corporate lawyers sued for racial discrimination by former staff. Patricia's name was in bold beneath it. That's taken out of context, Patricia stammered. The context, Marcus interjected, is in the court filings, all of which are authenticated. Click. Clarissa's license suspensions. Click. Renee's IRS investigation. Click. Alexandra's hotel lawsuits. Each revelation landed like a hammer. The women's composure was cracking. Whispers of lawyer and defamation circulated in panicked half-breaths. Jonathan's voice was even. If this were only about your personal records, I might have let it go. But it isn't. I also have hours of footage and audio, your voices plotting to remove Elise through false accusations, belittling her based on race, manipulating my daughter's emotions, and planting stolen property to discredit her. The room went utterly still. Then, from the speakers, came their own voices. Veronica instructing them to document every misstep, Patricia. Suggesting cultural incompatibility as a cover, Alexandra declaring Elise shouldn't be here at all. The teddy bear incident played in grainy black and white. The women's expressions caught in angles that revealed the performance behind the sympathy. Dr. Harper stepped forward. I've evaluated Sophie this week. Her emotional stability is directly tied to her relationship with Elise. Remove Elise, and you risk triggering regression nightmares, social withdrawal, academic decline. Keep her, and you preserve the single most consistent source of trust and comfort in this child's life since her mother's death. Sophie looked up at Jonathan, eyes wide. Daddy, Elise isn't leaving, is she? Jonathan's answer came without hesitation. No, sweetheart. She's not going anywhere. In fact, he turned toward Elise. Elise Carter, you've cared for my daughter with love, integrity, and dignity in the face of cruelty. You've shown me what family actually looks like. Will you marry me? The silence that followed was a mix of stunned disbelief and the sound of 5 carefully constructed social facades collapsing. Elise glanced at Sophie, who nodded so hard her hair bounced. I will, Elise said, her voice steady. Sophie threw her arms around her. Now you'll be my real mom. Veronica's face had gone pale. Clarissa muttered, You're marrying the maid? Jonathan's eyes hardened. I'm marrying the most honest woman I know, the woman who stood tall while you tried to destroy her out of prejudice. Mariah lifted her phone, recording. This will air Monday, and I'm calling it The Fall of 5. Marcus added, Every piece of evidence is documented, public, and irrefutable. Your reputations are already collapsing online. The 5 women rose, aiming for dignity but managing only stiff retreat. Jonathan wasn't done. One last thing, I'm suing all of you for conspiracy, slander, and attempted character assassination. My lawyers have already filed. The click of their heels down the marble hall was met by the flash of cameras. Mariah had tipped off. The press. Outside, reporters shouted questions about racism, fraud, and lawsuits. Inside, Elise stood with Sophie in her arms, unshaken. Jonathan touched her shoulder. Thank you for showing me what actually matters. The fallout was faster and more brutal than even Mariah expected. By the time the evening news cycle hit, The headline, "Racist Socialites Exposed in Lancaster Mansion Scandal," was already trending across every major platform. Screenshots from Jonathan's presentation went viral: Veronica's charity fraud, Patricia's lawsuits, Clarissa's license suspensions, Renee's IRS trouble, Alexandra's hotel staff accusations. The footage of the teddy bear discovery became a social media case study in performative innocence, with frame-by-frame breakdowns dismantling their act. Within a week, their carefully maintained reputations collapsed. Veronica's family cut off her inheritance after the board of their philanthropic foundation saw the embezzlement evidence. She quietly took a job as a sales associate in an upscale department store, where customers occasionally recognized her and whispered. Patricia's law firm dropped her. The State Bar suspended her license pending review of her conduct. Clarissa closed her clinic after patient trust evaporated overnight. Renee's architectural contracts dried up. Her creditors moved in, and bankruptcy followed. Alexandra sold off hotel properties to settle with former employees. Every one of them learned the same hard truth. Once the mask slips in the public, it doesn't go back on. Meanwhile, Elise's life transformed in ways that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with purpose. Jonathan insisted she finish her master's in special education, covering every expense. Upon graduating, she founded the Sophie Grace Foundation, named for the girl who had first trusted her, offering arts and music scholarships to underprivileged children. The mansion that had once been a silent battlefield became a hub for weekend workshops and after-school programs. Sophie flourished by 9. She could play 3 instruments, spoke Portuguese thanks to lessons from Elise's grandmother, and had the easy confidence of a child who knew she was deeply loved. 2 years later, Elise cradled a new addition to their family's 6-month-old David Jr. while sorting thank-you letters from scholarship recipients. One in particular stood out: a mother in Detroit whose son had been given a full ride to study violin. Jonathan handed it to her with a smile. Another one whose life changed because you refused to back down. Elise thought of the conversation she'd had with Sophie just a week earlier, when Sophie asked why those women had tried to send her away. Some people, Elise had said gently, grow up believing that having more means they are worth more, but cruelty and kindness can't live in the same heart. Sooner or later, cruelty destroys itself. Jonathan, in a rare television interview, was asked if marrying Elise had been controversial. He laughed. "If marrying a woman who is educated, compassionate, runs a foundation, speaks multiple languages, and saved my daughter from grief is controversial, the problem isn't with me. It's with anyone still measuring worth in all the wrong ways." At Sophie's school, her friends would sometimes ask about her famous mom. Sophie's answer was always the same: "She's the bravest person I know, and she makes the best chocolate cake in the world." That was Elise's real victory, not the public humiliation of her attackers, but the fact that her life became living proof that dignity, intelligence, and love will always outlast arrogance. Standing in the garden one Sunday morning, she watched Jonathan tossing a ball to Sophie while David Jr. clapped from his stroller. The same garden where she'd once been whispered about as the help was now her home, her family's safe ground. Elise knew the truest revenge hadn't been in striking back, it had been in rewriting the rules entirely, in building something so strong and joyful that it rendered her enemies irrelevant. And maybe that's the lesson here. You can fight prejudice with lawsuits, with exposure, with scandal, but the most enduring victory is to live in such a way that the people who tried to diminish. You have to watch your happiness grow larger than they ever imagined possible. This story isn't just about prejudice being exposed. It's about the quiet resilience that turns injustice into opportunity. True strength isn't measured by the ability to outshout your detractors. It's in holding your ground with dignity, letting the truth speak for itself, and building a life so full and rich in love that it drowns out every lie. If you've ever been underestimated, remember, sometimes the best revenge is simply to keep living well and let your success rewrite. The ending.